Do you think a son can look his own father in the eye and say, "Old and useless"? Well, believe it, because that was exactly what I heard. And he didn't say it in a fit of rage or by accident. He said it with intention, with anger, with that look that no longer sees a father but a burden. And the worst part wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. In front of his wife, his son, his mother-in-law, and without a shred of shame. So please listen to this story to the end and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Then tell me what part really resonated with your heart. And from what corner of this world are you listening to me? My name is Mr. Arthur. I am 79 years old. I've been a widower for more than 15 years, and I worked my whole life as a city employee in Crestwood. I was an administrative chief in the emergency management office. Yes, one of those places where everyone knows you, but no one notices when you disappear. I wasn't rich, but my family never lacked for anything. I gave my 3 children an education, a roof over their heads, hot food on the table, and an example of an honest life. My wife Helen and I built everything through hard work. But when she died, the light of the whole house went out. The silence after her death was louder than any cry. The coffee no longer tasted the same. The radio was silent, and the room became an empty void. It was then that my eldest son Robert told me something I will never forget. He hugged me at the funeral and whispered, "Come live with us, Dad. The house is yours too. Family is for taking care of each other, not for being left alone." And I, with a broken heart, accepted. I thought that despite the sadness, I still had a place, a corner, to spend my final days surrounded by family. So I closed up the house where I had lived for 40 years. I gave away most of my things, and I moved into Robert's house over in the Maplewood district. At first, everything was peaceful. I helped with what I could. I washed the dishes, cooked a meal from time to time, and sat down to watch television with my grandson, Ethan. He would call me Grandpa, sit on my lap, and ask me to tell him stories from when his dad was a child. Robert, in those days, still called me Dad, and I, even with a shattered soul, felt useful. But all of that began to change when Robert married Erica, a woman with a strong personality, a cold stare, and carefully measured words. It didn't take long for me to feel out of place. First, it was indirect comments. "Mr. Arthur, wouldn't you prefer to have your breakfast in the kitchen so you don't interrupt Ethan while he's studying in the living room?" Then came the double-meaning remarks. "Oh, the house is so small, and there are so many of us. You can barely walk around anymore." Little by little, I began to notice that I was no longer welcome. Meals were no longer a family affair. Sometimes they would leave a covered plate for me on the stove. Other times, I'd find out they had already eaten without me. The television was no longer for watching together. Ethan began to imitate the adults. He spoke to me with disdain, corrected me, told me I was in the way. Words that aren't born in children, but are learned by listening. Even so, I kept quiet. I thought it was better to keep the peace, that it was normal, that life changes. Until one day, a simple little thing made everything explode. It was about the electricity bill. It came in higher than usual. I just commented with no bad intention. "Did you all leave the air conditioner on all night? Because the bill is pretty heavy this time." Robert, who was at the table with everyone, looked at me as if I had spat on his food. "Are you complaining to us, Dad? Now you're going to control what we spend too, no, son? I just said it to say it." I tried to smooth things over, but that was it. He shot up from his chair, slammed his fist on the table, and shouted, "Old and useless, I'm tired of this. I'm not going to support you for another day. The one who lives on charity should keep his mouth shut." The silence in the house was brutal. No one said a thing. Erica lowered her head with a barely visible smile. Ethan pretended to be distracted. Erica's mother just got up and went for more water as if nothing had happened. And me, I just stayed there, with no air, no words, no home. Because in that moment I understood that that roof was no longer mine. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. I grabbed my sweater and left. I didn't say a word. I just walked. I crossed streets without any direction with my eyes clouded. I passed by a park where some gentlemen were playing dominoes. I sat on a bench. And for the first time in many years, I cried in silence. Not out of sadness, but out of anger, out of disappointment, for that feeling of having been ripped from my place in the world. And it was there on that bench, watching the dry leaves fall at the foot of the trees, where I made a decision. One that was going to change everything. But at that moment, I didn't tell a soul. That night, I didn't go straight back to their house. I walked for hours. I went into a little diner near the center of town. I ordered a strong coffee and a roll. The lady serving me looked at me with kind eyes, as if she could see I was carrying a shattered soul. I sat at a wooden table in the back. I took a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped my face. I felt shame. Yes, I confess. I was ashamed of myself, not for what had happened, but for having put up with so much, for having let myself be broken for the sake of love, for thinking that being quiet was a sign of wisdom, when in reality it's for people who forget their own worth. As I stirred my coffee, images of my youth came back to me, of when I used to walk Robert to school holding his hand, of when I taught him to ride a bike and he fell, scraping up his whole arm. He cried so much that it hurt me more than it hurt him. And yet this was the same boy who had shouted at me just hours ago, old and useless, as if I were a disease. After the coffee, I walked a little more until I reached the downtown square. There was a band playing old songs, and several older couples were dancing slowly. I stood there between the shadows and the streetlights, and I realized I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to walk through that door as if nothing was wrong because nothing was right anymore. So I did something I had never done before. I rented a room for the night. A small room with a hard bed and windows without curtains, but it was clean. I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at myself in the shabby mirror hanging on the wall. I saw a man I no longer recognized, a man who had given everything and who now had to start from scratch. But I also saw something else. I saw someone who for the first time in a long time was free. The next day I returned early. Robert had already left for work. Erica wouldn't look me in the eye, and Ethan locked himself in his room. No one asked where I had been. No one noticed my tired eyes. I went into my room, closed the door, and sat in front of the small table where I keep my wife's photo. "Helen," I said in a low voice, "I think I've had enough." That same morning I opened the old notebook where I've written down everything for years. In it I had important information, contacts, addresses, names of people who had helped me in the past. I wrote one word on the first page, dignity, and I started writing a list. The first name was Mr. Hatu Miller, an old friend from when I worked at the city records office. Today he has a consulting firm downtown and is one of the few people who still treats me with respect. I went to see him that same afternoon. He greeted me with a smile, offered me coffee, and listened without interruption. When I finished telling him what happened, he was silent for a moment, looked at me seriously, and said, "Mr. Arthur, what they did to you, not even the worst of fathers deserves that." I lowered my gaze. "And don't worry, if what you want is to get your space and your peace back, I'll help you." That was the first step. But I wasn't talking about wills or money. Not yet. First, I needed to find a place to live. A simple place where I could breathe without anyone measuring my words or calling me a nuisance. That's how I ended up on the south side of the city. A quiet area with corner stores, old folks on the benches, and the smell of freshly baked bread in the mornings. I saw an ad taped to the window of a pharmacy. Room for rent, single person. I called. A lady with a kind voice answered. I went to see it. It was a simple house, but it was clean with a small patio full of potted plants. The room had its own bed, a table, and a bathroom. It was everything I needed. The landlady, Mrs. Martha, looked me in the eyes and said, "If you're a quiet man, this is the place for you. We respect our elders here." I felt a lump in my throat. "Don't you worry, ma'am. I don't have the energy to fight with anyone anymore. I just want peace." That day I went back to Robert's house as if nothing had happened. I packed my clothes in black trash bags, my papers, my favorite book, the photo of Helen and the essentials. No one asked. No one came near me. Erica barely muttered. "Are you going out for a few days?" "Oh." And she went back to looking at her phone as if I were a piece of old furniture that was finally being taken away. When I left with the bags, the front gate closed behind me without any goodbyes. Not a take care. Not a, where are you going? Nothing. And as I walked away, I didn't feel sadness. I felt relief, like when you finally take off a shoe that's been pinching you all day. Like when you can finally take a deep breath without a pain in your chest. That night I slept in my new room. For the first time in years, I slept in silence, and I felt like I was my own man again. What came next was even more powerful. I woke up to the sound of birds making a racket on the roof. The light streamed in through an old curtain, and the smell of Mrs. Martha's freshly brewed coffee already filled the patio. I sat up in bed, stretched my arms, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I didn't have to announce what time I was getting up, or ask permission to use the kitchen. I washed my face, combed my hair with water, and went down to the corner store for a sweet roll. The man behind the counter greeted me with a sincere smile. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning, sir. Come on in, whatever you need." I got my roll, my coffee, and sat on a bench in front of the pharmacy. Students passed by, moms with their grocery bags, old ladies chatting at their doors. Life went on without shouting, without contempt. And I thought, this is how simple life can be when no one sees you as a burden. Mid-morning, I went back to see Mr. Miller. I asked him to help me get some documents in order. Property titles, an investment account I hadn't touched in years, and some deeds I had kept since my wife was alive. He reviewed everything calmly and said, "You have more than you think, Mr. Arthur." I didn't do it to be rich. I did it to leave something behind. And now I want to make sure that what I leave behind doesn't fall into the hands of those who don't deserve it. He looked at me without saying a word. He knew he didn't have to ask me any more questions. In the following days, I spent my time walking around the neighborhood. I felt light without the weight of contempt on my shoulders. I bought a small used radio at the market, the kind that only gets AM stations. And I would play it in the afternoons while I sat on the patio. I would talk to Helen in a low voice as if she were still sitting with me drinking coffee. "I'm okay, dear. Don't worry. They're not humiliating me anymore. They're not ignoring me anymore. I'm not invisible anymore." Mrs. Martha, who lived in the back of the house, offered me food a few times. It wasn't necessary, but I accepted for the company. We would sit and talk. She told me about her late husband, who died in a highway accident. She listened to me without judging, without interrupting. And your children, Mr. Arthur? I have 3, but now I walk alone. Sometimes walking alone is the only way to find yourself, she told me with the wisdom of a woman who has lived a full life. One Thursday afternoon, I got a call. It was Robert. Dad, where are you? Erica says you haven't come back, that you took your things. That's right. But why didn't you say anything? Because you didn't ask if I was okay when I was there. Why should I tell you anything now? There was silence. Look, I know I went too far. I was stressed. It was a bad moment. It wasn't a moment. It was years, Robert. Years. And I hung up. I felt something stir inside me. Not hatred, not resentment, just certainty. The certainty that for the first time I wasn't running away. I was making a choice, and that changes everything. A few days later, I went to the bank. I opened a new account with all my papers in order. I revoked all previous access. I updated everything. I also contacted Mr. Armstrong, a trusted lawyer from my old union days, to review my will. I told him I wanted to make changes, a lot of them. Do you want to leave everything in your children's names? He asked, adjusting his glasses. I haven't seen one of them in years. Another one hasn't called me since we buried his mother. And the one who was close by. He screamed in my face that I was a useless old man. So, I want to make things clear, not for revenge, for justice. The lawyer nodded. He took notes. He explained the steps, gave me dates, and offered to do everything with discretion. I left his office with my shoulders straight, the way they hadn't been in decades. That night, as I served myself a plate of rice and eggs, I thought about everything I had experienced since leaving that house. And I realized that you don't need to have everything to feel complete. You just need to not carry the contempt of those who are supposed to love you. I slept peacefully. I dreamed of the sound of the typewriter from my old office, of the deli sandwiches I used to eat with my colleagues, of Helen's laughter, of the years when life was still light. And when I woke up, I knew that what was coming next wouldn't just heal my wounds. It would open new paths for me. The next morning dawned with a gray sky, as if the weather knew something was settling inside me. I got up early, washed my face in front of the small bathroom mirror, and stood there for a few seconds, looking at my own wrinkles. Not with sadness, but with respect. These lines on my face weren't just marks of time. They were the paths that life had forced me to walk, often alone. I combed my hair with my hands, buttoned my shirt, and headed downtown, walking slowly, with the same firmness I felt when I carried my children, when they were small, when I went to work on rainy days, when I defended my principles, even if it cost me friendships. I passed by the flea market, where the man who sells old records greeted me with a, "How's it going, sir?" while cleaning his counter. I responded with a slight smile and continued on my way until I reached Mr. Armstrong's office. He was already waiting for me with the papers on his table, organized clean, just how I liked things when I was the head of the archives. I sat down without rushing. I read everything calmly, every line, every word. The document reflected exactly what I had asked for. Justice. There was no hatred in that new will. There was no revenge. There was memory, there was truth. The names that should be there were there, and the ones that weren't. Their absence also carried weight. The lawyer explained each point. He offered me one last chance to reconsider. I told him no. I told him this wasn't an impulse. It was a decision made with my soul in my hand. I signed with a firm hand, without trembling. And when I finished, I took a deep breath, like someone closing a long chapter. I thanked the lawyer for his respect, his patience, his care with every detail. We shook hands as men do when they understand each other without needing many words. And I walked out of there with a peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the peace of victory. It was the peace of recovery. That same afternoon, I stopped by the bank and confirmed that everything was updated. I closed the old account, the one I had shared with Robert since his mother's death. I opened a new one in my name only. I gave clear instructions, left written notes, and established that no family member had any authorization over my assets. The young man who helped me treated me with respect, as if he sensed I was doing something bigger than it seemed. And it was true. I wasn't just moving papers. I was reclaiming my history. When I returned to Mrs. Martha's house, I sat on the patio with a cup of coffee that she offered me. We didn't talk much. She just asked if everything had gone as I wanted. I nodded. She smiled and sat with me. Sometimes shared silence heals more than 1,000 pieces of advice. As the sun set behind the low roofs of the neighborhood, we listened to an old radio drama on the local station. And for a moment, I felt that life was giving me back a piece of what it had taken from me. That night, as I put my papers away in the metal box I use as a file, I found an old letter from Helen. It was from our 30th wedding anniversary. It said, "Arthur, no matter what happens, never stop believing that you deserve rest, respect, and joy. Even if the world forgets you, I never will." I read that sentence out loud as if she could hear me from somewhere, and I pressed the letter against my chest. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and felt her close, like when she used to hold my hand on difficult days. The following days I dedicated to simple things: sweeping the patio, caring for Mrs. Martha's plants, walking to the park in the mornings, and reading the newspaper on the sunniest bench. I became part of the neighborhood, one of those old men that everyone greets even if they don't know his name. Some would ask if I lived alone. I would tell them yes, but that I wasn't lonely. And it was true because inside I had myself back. But one day, something unexpected happened. There was a knock on the door, and when I opened it, I didn't expect to see who was standing there. It was noon. The sun beat down on the roof, and the buzz of flies mixed with the distant sound of an old song someone was playing on a radio. I was sitting on the patio finishing peeling a mandarin orange when I heard the soft knocks on the front door. I got up slowly, in no hurry, wiping my hands on a cloth. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one knew I lived there except for Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Miller, and Mrs. Martha. I walked down the narrow hallway, opened the door, and there he was. Robert, my son. He wasn't wearing a tie or a jacket. He also didn't have that arrogant expression I knew so well. He looked disoriented with his shirt untucked and a box in his hands. One of those gift boxes you buy when you want to apologize without saying it. We looked at each other for a few seconds. He was waiting for me to say something. I was simply observing. I didn't say, "Come in." I didn't say, "What a surprise." I just stood in the doorway upright with my dignity squarely on my shoulders. He took a deep breath and spoke. "Dad, I came because I heard some things. They say that you made changes to the will, that you closed accounts, that you left the house without leaving anything behind." I nodded without looking away. "Yes, I did." "But why like this, Dad?" Without talking about it, without giving me a chance, I had to hold back a bitter laugh. A chance I thought of all the days he ignored me. The lunches where he served me separately, the nights they closed their bedroom door, and I was left in silence hearing them talk about me as if I were already dead. I thought of every old man, every sigh of annoyance, every time they made me feel invisible among my own blood. And it hurt that he now wanted to call that a misunderstanding. Because you weren't looking for a dialogue when you shouted that I was a useless old man. You weren't looking to talk when you let your wife erase me from the table, from the house, from your life. He fell silent, staring at the ground. The gift was still in his hands. He held it out to me. "Here's something for you, just listen to me, Dad." I didn't mean to say that. It was a bad moment. Erica was upset, my mother-in-law too. I felt pressured. I felt pressured too, for years. But I didn't go around shouting in the middle of the living room. Do you know what I did? Robert, I kept quiet. I endured it. And now, not anymore. He looked at me like someone who doesn't recognize the man in front of him. Perhaps because he finally saw me clearly. Not as a piece of old furniture, not as a burden, but as a man of flesh and blood, with a memory, with a history, and with strength. "But you're my father," he said, almost as a complaint. "And you were my son, but you stopped seeing me as such. You stopped treating me like family. And now you come, and I don't know if out of guilt, self-interest, or fear, but you come when there's nothing left to claim. I'm not here for self-interest, Dad. That's what you say. But I know the value of my peace, and I'm not going to lose it again." I leaned against the doorframe. I had no intention of letting him in. He noticed. "So this is how it's going to be. This is how it has to be. Not with hate, but with justice. I didn't come into this world to be supported by anyone, but not to be humiliated either." There was a silence. The sun continued to burn over the patio. Robert looked down, took a step back, held the box for a few more seconds, and then left it on the doorstep. He didn't say goodbye. He just left. I closed the door slowly, not with anger, with firmness. I walked back to the patio. I sat down. I peeled another mandarin orange. Mrs. Martha asked from her window if everything was okay. "Now it is, ma'am. Now everything is in its place," and inside I felt something I hadn't felt since Helen was alive. Pride in myself. The following days were quiet, as if time knew it no longer owed me any explanations. I never mentioned Robert's visit again. Not to Mrs. Martha, not even to myself. I left the unopened box by the door where he had left it. I wasn't interested in what was inside because anything that tried to repair what I had lived through was too late. Apologies can't be bought in gift shops, and respect that is lost with shouting doesn't come back in pretty wrapping. I focused on my own life. On my walks in the park, my morning coffee with a roll from the corner bakery, my short chats with the vendors at the market, watering the plants on the patio as if they were precious relics. I started writing in my notebook again. Simple things, random thoughts, memories that sometimes hurt and sometimes heal. I liked to sit on my usual bench under the orange tree and watch people pass by. To feel that I was still part of the world. That I still had something to say, even if it was only to myself. One afternoon, Mrs. Martha found me reading a history book I had bought at a flea market stall. She offered me a bowl of homemade soup. I sat at her table, we ate without rushing, and between sips, she asked if I missed my family. I thought of Robert, of his silences, his shouting, the empty look in his eyes when he tried to come back. I thought of Ethan, the grandson, who repeated what he heard, like someone throwing stones without knowing they hurt. I thought of my other two children so distant that they no longer even remembered if I had a cough or if I was still alive. And I answered with the truth. Miss them, yes. But not what was. I miss what I dreamed it could be. She nodded with moist eyes. She told me she understood, that she had also had to create distance from people who shared her blood. Because dignity, she said, is not negotiable, not even with the ones you love. That night back in my room, I opened my box of memories. I took out a black and white photo of me with Helen on the day I received an award for 30 years of service. In the picture, she's hugging me from behind, smiling with pride. I stared at it for a long time, and I spoke to her in a soft voice. Here I am, dear, whole, without luxuries, without noise, but with peace. And that is worth more than everything they took from me. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Ethan. I recognized it by the unsure handwriting and spelling mistakes. He said he remembered when we used to watch old black and white movies, that he missed my stories, and he asked if he could come visit me alone without his parents. I felt a pang in my chest, not of nostalgia, but of something more complex, as if a part of me was opening up, unsure if it should let itself be touched. I responded calmly, thanking him for the letter, telling him the door would always be open when he wanted to come with respect. But I also told him that some things need time, that not everything is fixed with a simple "I miss you." Sometimes you have to grow up and understand the damage before you can ask for a hug. That same week, I went to the local community center. They offered me a space to teach a reading class for senior citizens. I accepted. I prepared with my notebooks, my glasses, and all the patience the years had given me. I started with 3 people. Then more came. Some didn't know how to read or write. Others just wanted to feel accompanied. And I, in that place, found a part of myself I thought was lost. I didn't need money. I wasn't looking for recognition. I just wanted to give something that wouldn't run out. Words Memory Company. The day that marked me the most was when Mrs. Lucy, an 82-year-old woman who had been widowed young, told me, "You taught me how to read my own birth certificate, and now I want to write a letter to my daughter." She dictated it to me with a trembling but firm voice. I helped her. In the end, she cried, and so did I. Because I understood that until your last breath, you can always start over. And so between letters, plants, slow steps, and shared silences, I rebuilt my life, no longer as a wounded father, no longer as an abandoned old man, but as a whole man. Mr. Arthur. The one many thought was defeated, but who was just waking up. One Saturday morning, as I was making coffee in my small kitchen, I heard someone knocking insistently on the door. I thought it was Mrs. Martha asking for help with her gas tank, as had happened before. But when I opened it, I found a scene I didn't expect. It was Erica, alone, standing there with her makeup smudged, her eyes swollen, and an expression somewhere between anger, fear, and desperation. She was holding a manila envelope and a crumpled folder. She didn't greet me. She didn't say good morning. The first thing that came out of her mouth was a mix of reproach and pleading. "Did you really remove Robert from the will? Did you really leave us out of everything?" I stood there firm without moving an inch, like an old tree that no longer bends in the wind. I asked her to speak quietly, not to shout in the street. She asked if she could come in. I told her no, that this house was my space, that if she wanted to talk, we would do it right there on the sidewalk, like 2 adults who say things to each other without beating around the bush. She took a deep breath, as if swallowing her pride, and showed me the papers. They were copies of the new will, the one I had signed with Mr. Armstrong. I didn't understand how she had gotten them, but it didn't surprise me. People like her always know how to find a way when money is involved. "Robert is not doing well," she said. "He's depressed. He's not sleeping, not eating. He says that you hate him, that you left him with nothing." "I don't hate him, ma'am, but he's the one who left something behind. He left me without respect, without a home, without a place." "You're exaggerating. It was just one argument." "It wasn't one. It was years of exclusion, of small humiliations that hurt more than shouting. Do you know how many times I ate alone in silence in the kitchen, while you all laughed at the table?" She didn't know what to say. She looked down. She adjusted her blouse. She tried to regain control of the conversation. She told me she understood I was hurt, but that I was affecting Ethan. That the boy was crying, that he was asking for me. That he felt like he had lost his grandfather. It hurt to hear that because Ethan had been for a time my only joy in that house. But I also knew I couldn't let myself be manipulated by nostalgia. And you don't think he lost me the day he repeated your phrases, when he told me I was just pathetic, when he laughed at me with his little friends, as if I were some old joke he was a child, Erica murmured. And you're an adult, and Robert is my son. But no one in that house acted like one. She was silent for a long time. Then she told me that the will, the car, the properties, that all of it could be fixed. That maybe I should not be so drastic. That family is family. I looked at her this time with compassion, but also with firmness. I told her it wasn't about the car or the money. That what was broken can't be fixed with signatures, it's fixed with memory. And for that you need more than papers. I offered her a glass of water. She didn't accept it. She left without saying goodbye. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just left. But I stood there watching her walk away, as if the mask they had worn for so many years had finally fallen off. And I felt relief, a deep relief. Not because she was gone, but because I no longer had to stay. That afternoon, I sat on the park bench with my notebook in hand. I wrote a single sentence. Recovery isn't about going back to what you were. It's about finally being who you are. And below that, for the first time, I wrote without fear. I am Arthur. I am no longer the father of, I am me. After Erica's visit, several days passed in which the phone remained silent. There were no messages, no calls, no letters. It was as if they had finally understood that I was not going to move, that I was not going to give in or retreat a single step. But it was also as if I internally had finished closing a door that was already old, loose, and full of cracks. I woke up early, as always. I had my coffee on the patio. I would greet Mrs. Martha and help her with her grocery bags. Life had taken on a simple but true rhythm, and although on the outside it seemed like nothing was happening on the inside every day, I felt more firmness in my feet, more clarity in my gaze, and more silence in my soul. Not that sad silence of the old days, but a serene one. The kind that comes when you no longer owe anyone anything, and no one owes you anything either. One afternoon, the coordinator of the community center where I taught reading asked if I would be willing to visit a home for senior citizens right there in the city. They needed a volunteer to talk with the residents, to read to them, to simply keep them company. I said yes without much thought. Not because I wanted to do charity, but because something in that invitation struck an internal chord, as if it were an opportunity to give back what I myself had needed a short time ago. Listening, presence, respect. The place was called The Willows. It was on a quiet street with jacaranda trees and white walls covered in bougainvillea. A young, kind nurse with a soft voice greeted me. She showed me the facilities. A large dining room, several shared rooms, a small patio with benches and a fountain that no longer worked. In every corner you could feel the weight of stored-up stories. I saw gentlemen sitting alone, staring into space, ladies with their hands folded, muttering to someone who was no longer there. Others sleeping with their heads hanging, as if the weariness of the soul weighed more than that of the body. They took me to a room where 7 grandfathers were sitting in a circle. I introduced myself with a calm voice, told them a little of my story without going into detail. I just said that I was also old, had also been forgotten, and that now I just wanted to share some words. I read them a short story, one of those I used to read to Ethan when he was younger and still loved me. At first no one reacted, but when I finished, a gentleman in the back with a trembling voice said, "Thank you for not talking to us like we're children." That sentence pierced me because I understood what he meant. The world treats old people like burdens, like clumsy children, like things that get in the way in the living room. From that day on, I went every week. And every week, one more person would open up, talk, remember. Mr. Frank, for example, had been a baker his whole life. He taught me how to make a special kind of sweet bread with an old recipe that I wrote down in my notebook. Mrs. Rose dictated letters to me for a daughter who lives in another state and hasn't visited her in 6 years. Mr. Joe, who can barely see anymore, asked me to read passages from the Bible to him, not to pray, but to remember his mother's voice. And I, in those visits, found something I didn't know I was missing, something that no inheritance could buy. Purpose. One afternoon, while walking back from the Willows, I passed by a middle school. The students were coming out in a rush, backpacks on their shoulders, laughter and shouts everywhere. Among them, I saw a familiar face. Ethan. He was there, taller, with the same eyes as his father at his age. He saw me. He stood still as if he didn't know whether to approach or run. I didn't move either. We looked at each other from a distance. He took a step, raised his hand, wanted to say something, but his friends called him, and he, with a quick gesture, turned around and left. I stood there for a moment, not with sadness, but with a kind of acceptance. I understood that he wasn't ready yet, and I also understood that I was no longer waiting. When I got home, Mrs. Martha had saved me a plate of chicken and vegetable soup. I sat at her table as I did every Friday, and we ate peacefully. She asked me how my day had gone. I told her about the sweet bread, about Mrs. Rose's letter, about the passage I read with Mr. Joe. She smiled. She told me I had more light in my face. I told her it wasn't light. It was that finally I wasn't carrying anyone else's shadow. That night, as I wrote everything in my notebook, I thought about how far away Robert's house had become. Not in miles, but in spirit. I thought about how it used to be. Waking up afraid to bother someone, eating quickly, swallowing my words when they corrected me, biting my tongue so as not to be a nuisance. And now I had fewer things, less space, fewer comforts. But I had something I had never fully had before. Freedom. I also thought about something Mr. Frank told me while we were making bread. Dough rises when you leave it in peace, not when you squeeze it too hard. I laughed as I wrote it, because I understood that the same happens with dignity, that you need space, silence, warmth, that you can't grow where all you receive is criticism, contempt, or disdain. I put the notebook away. I turned off the light. I went to bed. And before closing my eyes, I thought of one more thing, that life with all its blows had given me back to myself, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence of having said enough. And the next day, without knowing it, I was going to receive news that would finally seal this entire journey. That morning, the sun peeked shyly through the clouds. It had rained overnight, and the smell of wet earth still hung in the air. I woke up before the first rooster crowed, as was my custom, and prepared my coffee in silence. I sat on the patio with my hot cup between my hands and the notebook open on my lap. I was thinking about writing about the previous day, but something stopped me. A feeling in my chest, like a premonition, as if something was about to arrive. It didn't take long. There was a knock on the door. Once, twice, loud, direct. It wasn't like when Mrs. Martha came by. It wasn't the mailman either. I approached, slowly opened it cautiously, and there he was, a tall man in a dark suit with a clipboard in his hand and a sealed envelope. He looked at me seriously, but with respect. He introduced himself as a court server. He handed me the envelope. It was a formal notification. Robert was suing me. He was asking to nullify the will. He claimed mental incompetence on my part, implying that I had been influenced, that I was confused, that I was not in full possession of my faculties. I read that paper once, twice. Not out of surprise, but because of the harshness of seeing it for what it really was. The last desperate attempt of someone who never knew how to lose. My hand didn't tremble. Neither did my voice. I thanked the server, signed the receipt, and closed the door. I sat at the table, calmly put on my glasses, and read the document again. It was absurd, empty. Legally, it had no basis, but emotionally, it was devastating. Because it wasn't about money. It was about betrayal, about how far someone is willing to go to avoid accepting a consequence. Instead of getting angry, I took a deep breath. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Armstrong. He told me not to worry, that everything was in order, that the law protected me. He offered to come see me. I told him it wasn't necessary, that I'd rather go to him. I got ready with my clean shirt, my usual pants, and my well-shined shoes. I walked to the main avenue, took the bus, and arrived at his office without rushing. He received me with a coffee already prepared, as if he knew I would need it. We reviewed everything point by point. He explained that these types of lawsuits were common when an inheritance no longer benefited the children. That many didn't cry for the parent, but for the loss of control. That I was fine, that I had signed in full possession of my rights. That the will was ironclad. I nodded in silence, not because I doubted him, but because a part of me still hurt. Not because of the papers, but because of what those papers revealed. That to my son, I was an object that could be disputed, claimed, corrected with lawyers. After leaving the office, instead of going straight home, I stopped at the Willows. I wanted to see Mr. Joe, Mrs. Rose, Mr. Frank. I needed to be near someone who expected nothing from me but my presence. I told them calmly what had happened. Mr. Frank let out a laugh. Now it turns out you're the crazy one. You're more sane than all of us put together. We laughed. But then he, with a serious voice, told me, that's what happens when silence becomes your only defense. People think you don't think, that you don't decide. But you did what many don't dare to do. You recovered yourself. That phrase stayed with me like a mark on my soul because it was true. I didn't react with scandal or with shouting or with threats. I reacted by withdrawing, by creating order with quiet justice. And that, to many, it seems like madness, but it's wiser than any scandal. The days passed. I received another letter, this time from Ethan. It was longer, more honest. He asked for my forgiveness, not for what he did, but for what he failed to see. He told me that at school they had talked about grandparents, that everyone shared something about theirs, and that he didn't know what to say, because he had lost the right to brag about me. It hurt to read that, because I didn't want to be a memory. I wanted to have been a living part of his life. But I also understood that he, unlike his parents, was beginning to see with the eyes of someone who truly wanted to change. I answered him with my heart. I told him that forgiveness wasn't automatic, that words weren't enough, but that when someone truly wants to make amends, they have to start with respect. That if he ever wanted to see me, he had to come alone, without instructions, without promises, just with truth. And that then we could start something new. Not the same, not like before, but new. The same day I sent that letter, Mrs. Martha gave me a small plant, a tuberose cutting. She told me, this one needs firm soil, but it will grow slowly like you. I put it in a pot in front of the window, and every morning I looked at it day after day, one more leaf, a taller stem, a sign of silent life like mine. That night, I went to bed with the window open. I listened to the crickets, the distant bark of a dog, and the hum of an old street lamp. I closed my eyes, and I thought that even though there were still things to resolve inside, there were no more empty spaces, only firm ground. That morning I woke before dawn, not from insomnia, but from habit. I sat up in bed, stretched my arms, and listened to the silence of the house. It was a different silence than before. It no longer hurt, it didn't remind me of loneliness. It was a clean silence, the kind that only comes when you've put things in their place. I got up, made myself a coffee, and sat by the window. The tuberose plant had its first bud. Tiny, shy, but there it was. And I couldn't help but smile because in that bud I saw myself. It wasn't long before I heard footsteps approaching the gate, a few soft taps like someone who doesn't want to bother. I got up, looked through the crack, and there was Ethan, alone, with a backpack on, a wrinkled shirt, and his eyes lowered. I opened the door. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. He just took off his backpack, put it on the floor, and said, "Grandpa, if you'll let me, I want to read you something." He took out a notebook and began to read me a letter he had written himself. He didn't ask for forgiveness like someone trying to clear their conscience. He spoke from the heart. He said he understood, that he now saw things he didn't see before, that he wanted to get to know me again without anyone telling him what to think. I offered him a glass of water, and we sat on the patio. I asked him about school, about his interests, about why he had come alone. He told me he no longer trusted what his parents said, that every time they talked about me he felt something wasn't right, that he wanted to see for himself. And there, as he told me about his history class and his plans to study engineering, I realized that maybe life hadn't taken so much from me after all. It had given me this, the chance to plant a new seed. Not in everyone, but at least in one. I told him about the community center, about the seniors who read with me, about Mr. Frank and his sweet bread. I showed him my notebook, my recipes, my blooming tuberose, and he, curious, listened attentively. He looked at me as if I were someone important, as if he were just discovering that his grandfather had a history, a soul, a strength, and that filled my chest with a calm I hadn't felt in decades. Because there is nothing more beautiful than regaining a grandson's respect, not from pity, but from admiration. He stayed with me all afternoon. He helped me wash the dishes, organize the books, take out the trash. I made him some rice pudding, like his grandmother used to make. And when it was time to leave, he hugged me tight. Not with guilt or with sorrow. He hugged me as if he wanted to make sure I was real. He said thank you and left. I watched him walk down the street with the sun setting behind him, and I knew that he hadn't taken that step because of his parents or out of obligation. He had taken it for himself, and that was worth more than any inheritance. That same night, Mr. Armstrong called me. He informed me that the lawsuit had been dismissed, that the judge considered the petition unfounded, that everything was legally solid. I thanked him calmly. I told him the result didn't matter so much to me anymore, because what I had achieved wasn't written in a document. It was in my peace, in my rest, in my home, in my name. The days went on. I went back to the Willows as always. Mr. Joe asked me to read the 23rd Psalm again. Mrs. Rose asked about Ethan. I told them with a smile that came from my soul. They applauded me. They hugged me, because they knew what it costs to be heard when you no longer have the strength to shout. And I no longer shouted. But my silence spoke for me. One Sunday we organized an open reading at the center. I invited Mrs. Martha, her neighbors, and also Ethan. He was assigned to read a passage from a Steinbeck novel. He read it firmly, with a clear voice. In the end, everyone applauded. He looked at me from the stage and winked. In that gesture there was pride but also gratitude. Because without saying it, he knew that this space, this place, this voice were his thanks to me. And so without promises or empty reconciliations, life found its new course. I never saw Robert again. He never looked for me either. I heard he sold the car, moved to a different house, and continues to blame the world for his decisions. I don't wish him ill, but I don't owe him anything either. Justice didn't come from a punishment. It came from the silence that he could never endure. And that was enough for me. And that's why, son, if you are listening to this, I want you to know something. It is never too late to return to yourself. Sometimes life doesn't ask you to forgive everything or to forget. It asks you to respect yourself, to not accept less than you deserve, to hold your head up even if you are alone. Because solitude with dignity is worth more than company with contempt. And you who are listening to me, tell me something. If you had been in my place, what would you have done, and where are you listening to me from?